Your Excellency President El Sisi, the President of the Republic, distinguished guests, we are now about to launch and present the Human Development Report 2021 in Egypt. This report is considered to be the most important international report to give scientific measurement of the success of any country in achieving development in different fields. The entity that developed and worked on this report is United Nations Development Program in cooperation with the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. The report is under the title Human Development in Egypt 2021. Development is right to everyone, Egypt, pathways and prospects. I want to increase more talk about the definition of human development, but we'll try to give a short definition to simplify things for the citizens. Human capital means changing and developing the capabilities, the potentials, and the options of the human being. Human development is based mainly, before everything, on giving the opportunity to people to live the type of life they select and to provide them as well with what would enable them to make an option in life. Let me tell you that the main size of the triangle of human development is health, education, and income. In fact, there are a lot of things that were achieved through the commitment of the Egyptian state mentioned in the Constitution of 2014. There are still challenges and objectives that the state of Egypt is still working on to achieve Egypt's Vision 2030. It's worth noting that this report has not been launched for 11 years, since 2011, and this has been a very critical decade in the history of Egypt, especially during the exceptional year of the pandemic, COVID-19. Your Excellency, the President, distinguished guests, let me introduce to you the speakers during this session. Dr. Adel Abdel Latif, the manager of United Nations Cooperation Office between the southern countries. Dr. Khalid Zakaria, the main author of the report of human development in Egypt. Dr. Hala Said, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development in Egypt. Dr. Naim Al-Qasir, the representative of WHO in Egypt. Mr. Eric Oshlan, the Director of the Office of the ILO in Egypt. Ms. Frederica Mier, the representative of United Nations FPA in Egypt. Ms. Rania Hadiyah, the Director of Egypt's Office in United Nations Habitat. Dr. Mohammed Bayimi, the Assistant to the Resident Director of UNDP in Egypt. Mr. Jeremy Hawkins, the representative of UNICEF Egypt. Ms. Christine Ab, the representative of UN Women in Egypt. And Dr. Noha Bakr, the international expert in public policies. I would like to welcome you all. Let me start first with Dr. Adel Abdel Latif. Dr. Adel Abdel Latif, you are the advisor to this report. Would you please explain to us what distinguishes this report, especially for the state of Egypt, and the timing of launching this report? Does it have any significance? Your Excellency President Abdel Fattah El Sisi, distinguished guests, at the outset, I would like to express my happiness and my gratitude for inviting me to participate in developing the Human Development Report 2021 in Egypt and participating in discussing and launching it. I would like to remind you, as mentioned before, that this report was developed by a number of independent researchers who are experienced in this field. So the report is not the opinion of the state of Egypt or the Egyptian government or the UNDP, but it is the opinion of independent, neutral experts who seek to provide information and to discuss the main topics of interest to the Egyptian citizen. As mentioned before, this report is issued after 10 years of the last edition. I would like to remind you that the main role of Human Development Report that are advised to be periodical is to measure the achievements, and the report is recommended to be published every 2 years because it gives us scientific evidence, and the regular measurement enables us to revise the achievements, identify the risks that might negatively influence the development path. No doubt, the presence of such a report provides a foundation for a joint community vision. If I would cover what distinguishes this report, as mentioned before, this report is issued after 10 years, and it is the 12th edition of such a report. It does not put Egypt only on top of the Arab countries, but on top of a universal level, because Egypt is one of the first developing countries that issued such a number of reports since the year 1994. And it is also the report that for the first time has the attendance of the President in its launching, and this symbolizes the attention given by the Presidency to the issue of human development, not only from the economic perspective, but from the human rights perspective. This report, for the first time, deals with the total development issues in Egypt, so it is considered to be a comprehensive survey of development in Egypt, and it is the first human development report that covers two important issues: governance, environment and climate change, and dealt with them through comprehensive analysis of the status quo. And it also dealt with the issue of women empowerment, not only as related to women, but also as a community issue. As we say in the literature of development, development without women participation is doomed before its beginning. And it's also the first report at the national level all over the world that tackles the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. I would like also to refer to the fact that the report summarized the regional developments surrounding Egypt, but in the future we advise giving more concern to this issue because the regional status may support or influence negatively development in a country. As Egypt and its region and neighborhood are going all through a phase that faces a lot of armed violent conflicts that no doubt influences the path of development, and we cannot measure the progress of development in a country that goes through such circumstances with other countries that might be in a more peaceful, stable regional status. I would like also to talk about the methodology of developing this report. This report talks about human development as a right to everyone, according to the decision of the General Assembly of the UN in the year 1986 that stipulated in its preamble that right to development is the right to all human beings, and equal opportunity to development is the right to nations, individuals forming nations equally, and the human being is the main core of development. Thus, the policy of development needs to make the human being the main participant and the main beneficiary. This declaration started the right of the developing countries to select their development pathway and to achieve their real independence without any external interventions according to its internal principles. And as the declaration says, that the state shoulders the main responsibility to create the conducive environment to practice the right to development. The report is trying to enforce the right to development through the concept of human development. And this concept of human development that was launched in the year 1990 after a few years of announcing the right to development mentioned that human beings are the real wealth of any country or nation, and we need to widen the options of people, and identified three main fields. It's providing healthy life as well as acquiring knowledge, reaching out to the resources needed to live a decent life. Human development then reflects balance between between opportunities and potentials and consider economic development as a tool and the means and not the main purpose of development. So what gathers the right to development and the concept of human development is a joint vision and a joint purpose, and it is protecting welfare, dignity and opportunities to everybody. I would like to mention that this study and this report on human development is one of the few works that dealt with the relation between the right to development and the concept of human development. One final word. What's next? What's the purpose of this report? The report in tackling issues pertaining to investing in human capital, economic reform and social protection and women empowerment, environment protection, governance and confronting climate change came up with a future vision under the title A New Decade for Development, Egypt's Pathway 2030 to Enhance Economic and Sustainable Development. And this last part talked about considering the Covenant 2020-2030, the agenda of Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, and Egypt is considered to be the first country that discussed the main elements of working during this achievement decade by identifying the goals, the targets, and the mechanisms for their implementation. So this report develops the future vision, which is the pathway after studying the reality and the status quo. And the report exceeds the borders of Egypt, as it is a research experience from which a number of developing countries can benefit. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Adel. Through your speech, you said that this report develops a future vision, the pathways and the prospects. And since the beginning of the day, we were waiting for the details of this report, Human Development 2021. To identify the efforts exerted, where are we, to where we are heading, what's next. I will give the floor now to Dr. Khaled Zakaria Amin, the main author of this report, to introduce to us the most important details and sectors in this report. In the name of Allah, Your Excellency President Abdel Fattah El Sisi, the President of the Republic, distinguished guests, it gives me pride and pleasure to stand today before this galaxy to present to you the Human Capital Development Report 2021, Development, the Right to Everyone, Pathways and Prospects. Before introducing the details of this report to you, I would like to extend thanks to my colleagues, the experts of UNDP, who exerted all efforts to monitor and analyze the development march in Egypt over the previous 10 years. Also, I would like to commend the efforts of the committee formed by the Egyptian government, presided over by Dr. Hala Said, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, for facilitating the role of the researchers through providing all information and data needed to transparently develop this report. I would like to thank Dr. Maya Mercy, the rapporteur of the report, for her pioneer role in supporting all activities of the team of experts of the UNDP to finalize this report. Before reviewing the report, I would like to mention two remarks. The first remark is that due to the large volume of this report, because it is in 290 pages, so in my presentation I will focus on a number of issues and not all issues covered by this report. The second remark, the team of experts of the United Nations collected data up till the end of the fiscal year 2010, 2011, and sometimes covered some of the figures and the expectations for the year 2011, 2012. So there might be some update to these figures that would be presented. As for the content of my presentation, it covers three main issues in the report, the outcomes of the report, the recommendations to support the future policies. As for the main issues covered by this report, these issues emanate from the definition of human development and development to everyone. So it dealt with investing in human capital, economic reform in Egypt, social protection, renaissance, and women empowerment, governance, as well as environmental protection systems. In each of these topics, the researchers reviewed the constitutional framework as it is the governing framework for development in Egypt, in addition to Egypt's Vision 2030 and other visions resulting from such comprehensive vision. In addition to the number of rules and laws governing these different topics. The most important outcomes of the report, we'll go through them now. For investing in human capital, there has been increase in human development in Egypt, and Egypt moved to the category of countries with high human development. And this is the main indicator that reflects health, educational aspects, as well as those related to the national income and the citizens' income. Regarding health as a sector and education, it was clear that there has been an improvement in accessibility, and this has to do with the outputs. The indicators, for example, related to dropping out of schools are reducing. Indicators on moving from one educational stage to the other is increasing. As for the indicators of enrollment in schools is increasing, and also there is no gap now between boys and girls in education. In addition to starting to deal with the geographical gaps or the spatial gaps that led to discrepancies between rural and urban areas in Egypt. Also, the report monitored a number of issues in the education sector, one of which is that the indicators pertaining to the quality of education and those on competitiveness with other countries are still in need for more progress. And a large part of it comes as a result of increase in overpopulation that leads to focusing more on accessibility rather than quality and competitiveness. Concerning the health sector, there has been an improvement in the general performance of the health sector, and you can see before you here two main indicators. The first is the average life expectancy, and it has increased for both men and women, and also reduction in mortality rates of infants below the age of 5, and this shows the better performance in health sector. But in the meantime, the report monitored the number of health initiatives made by the Egyptian government during the last years, and the report covered this, considering these initiatives to deal with the main structural problems in the health sector. The health sector is still suffering from a number of structural problems that need more work, so it was so important that such initiatives would deal quickly with such issues from which this sector is suffering. And the hepatitis C was one of those main issues that such initiatives dealt with, which led to the increase of cure rates and reduction to infection with this disease, as well as reduction of the cost of treatment. And also there were the initiative of 100 million health for diseases, as well as supporting the health of Egyptian women. These initiatives helped greatly in dealing with main issues in the health sector, but the health sector while applying the universal health coverage system and having a general umbrella might face more developments. As for the housing sector, the Egyptian constitution is one of the few constitutions that talked about decent housing, and it was very clear through the report and the experts that there are a number of developments achieved regarding providing decent housing to segments of the community. 75% of the housing units that were constructed are social housing units and alternative housing units to unsafe areas and informal settlements. Also, the report talked about the informal settlements and unsafe areas and its security, economic, social impacts. So they documented and analyzed the Egyptian experience regarding this. Also, there was the issue of expanding water and wastewater coverage. You can see here that for potable water, 100% coverage in urban areas, 75% in rural areas. For wastewater, still less in rural areas in comparison to urban areas. But with the initiative of Decent Life, it is expected to be improved greatly in the next phase. The second issue that was covered is economic reform. For economic reform, this is an issue that has a clear reference, the Egyptian constitution, that has set a number of targets to spend on specific sectors directly related to human development. And these are the sectors of health, education, higher education, research. And also Egypt's Vision 2030 has a general framework to target economic reform. The economic reform had a number of goals and tools based on comprehensive financial monetary reform, as well as changing the financial structure in Egypt. Investing in infrastructure also was one of the issues that took great concern from the researchers who worked on this report, because we have a large number of national infrastructure projects that had a great influence on economic performance, reducing the unemployment rate, increasing employment, as well as creating a better future for economic development in Egypt. The report focused on these major projects and their influence on macroeconomics. There has been great development in the economic indicators as a result of the economic reform program and the national projects, and this was mentioned in the report. Of course, unemployment rate and budget deficit rates and inflation rates reduced, and comparison between the year 2016 and 2017, the beginning of the reform program, and 2020-2021 showed that these indicators were influenced by COVID-19. So the growth rate has reduced to be 3.3%, but for the year 2021, the expectation is that the GDP will reach 5.4%, besides increasing the per capita of the GDP to 3.6% after it was 1.7%. Of course, as a result to the pandemic and its negative influence on the economic performance in Egypt, there were interventions that took place at the level of expenditure. The most influenced sectors, the cash transfer, but we expect that this influence would go on despite its shrinkage over the past year. Also, the report talked about the public debt, because public debt is very important, as well as the service and the interest rate and the payments pertaining to this debt, because this pressurizes the state budget. But it's clear first that the debt comparison to the GDP reduced, and also the percentage of the debt from the revenues had reduced, and this gives a financial gap through which the state would be able to use the savings for the purpose of human development. But generally speaking, the report is still focusing on the idea that the public debt is still high in comparison to other countries in this same category that Egypt belongs to. Subsidy was another topic that was covered by the report, and the report focused mainly on restructuring the subsidy despite the increase of the subsidy figures in Egypt. It's very clear that the subsidy now has turned from energy and oil subsidy to subsidy of supplies, commodities, and social privileges. And I think that this is so important because this is related to the right to human development and the right to development in general. Regarding poverty, it is one of the main goals, reducing the poverty rates, and it is clear that during the last millennium there has been a rapid increase in poverty, and this increase, of course, was more during the first years after applying the economic reform program 2016-2017, but according to the report, the poverty rate started to reduce after the economic reform program started to give results. And the general indicator of poverty reduced from 32% to 29.7%. It is worth noting that this is considered to be the first reduction over the past 20 years. The issues of poverty included more in-depth analysis. For example, this diagram shows the relation between the size of the family and the poverty rates. If the members of the family is 4 to 5%, then the poverty rate is 25%, while those families that have 8 to 9 members, the poverty rate increases to reach 67%. The other issue that was tackled regarding poverty is the Egyptian economic zones and the distribution of poverty. The report showed that the less the contribution of the economic regions in economic performance, the more the poverty in these economic regions, and this is directly linked to the national projects that started going to Upper Egypt and other areas that were not targeted before, as this would reduce the gap between the economic zones and the spread of poverty. The third issue was the social protection, and the report monitored the change in the philosophy of social protection. This is very important because the previous policy was based on the idea of protection and relief, and this led to increasing the number of individuals enjoying the social protection services without trying to get those individuals out of the dependence and the poverty cycle. So now the philosophy has changed from protection to empowerment. And this is a very important issue, as it gives us the vision how in the future we would deal with such an issue. The report also drew a map for social protection in Egypt with all programs, be it based on subscriptions, rations, relief projects, emergency projects, and this is a clear map. And also it reflected the idea of increasing public expenditure on social protection programs. This part of the report focused mainly on the social insurance law and the universal health coverage law. Because out of these two diagrams in front of you, it is clear that those two laws came in time, one in 2018 and one in 2019, to deal with the structural problems. The first shows that social insurance coverage in Egypt was 61% in 1998 and 50%. It reduced to be 43% and 30% in 2018. This means that the insurance system did not help people be under this umbrella and did not provide them with the services that enable them to join the system. The other diagram shows that despite the insurance coverage increased in health insurance, yet expenses on health out of pocket has increased. And this reflects that the health insurance services had a problem. So the report focused mainly on these two laws as the nucleus to a better future with these issues of health insurance and social insurance. For women empowerment, I think that this is one of the topics that was given due attention by the report from different perspectives, political empowerment, and it's clear before you now that Egypt moved 47 ranks high in political empowerment indicator, and this is the best ranking Egypt enjoyed during the past 10 years due to increasing women representation in legislative and executive bodies. As for economic empowerment, the results were not up to that level of political empowerment. Despite the increase in the number of beneficiaries from microcredit, especially women, yet the percentage is still lower than the percentage of men who receive microcredit, especially regarding the value of this credit. Also, the unemployment rates are still high amongst women between 2017 till 2020. The unemployment rate for men is 6.4% and it is 21% for women. It's clear that during the last year, 2019-2020, there has been a decrease in unemployment rate in women from 22.7% to 15.7%. As for protection issues, the researchers worked on them and they monitored the legislative amendments made over the previous years. Generally speaking, the report talked about raising awareness issues and the national strategies like women empowerment strategy. Dealing with COVID-19 pandemic was very important because a big impact was felt by women, and the report showed the measures undertaken by the government, and here we can say that Egypt was ranked first amongst countries in North Africa and West Asia regarding the measures made for pandemic according to UN Women report and UNDP report. As for environmental protection, this was another part that is covered by this report, and here it dealt with the power subsidy policies because this influenced economy, subsidy, as well as environmental issues. In the meantime, we discussed also the issue pertaining to climate change and the related policies. We find that Egypt moved 8 ranks upwards in adapting to climate change and confronting it, and this is an indicator that has 57 countries. Those 57 countries are responsible for 90% of the emissions. Governance is another issue that was covered by this report, and it is considered to be new And it is clear that Egypt's performance in governance indicators found development. There were indicators that witnessed increase and others decline during the previous years. For example, the effectiveness of the country and the rule of law as international indicators witnessed increase. The e-government, despite the great expansion in e-infrastructure, yet this indicator was declined due to the fact that all governments are working on this. So despite the steps made by the state of Egypt, yet this indicator is still declining. As for governance, it was so important to deal with administrative reform. We dealt with administrative reform from a general perspective and not looking only at the state institutions. So there was a very important component on the efficiency of the administrative body. They identified the efforts in this context, efforts related to the restructuring of the state apparatus as well as the human capital, the reform of the financial system. We talked about moving from the items budget to performance and program budget, as well as the automation of the public budget and e-payment. These were all things that were covered. As for expansion and decentralization, it is one of the issues dealt with here. Decentralization is a constitutional request, as the Egyptian constitution focused on this. And on the ground, the report monitored that there are still a lot of steps to move more towards decentralization, as Egypt is one of the countries that did not take a lot of reforms for decentralization. For example, the analysis of the team showed that the local revenues as a percentage of the GDP does not exceed 2%. And this is one of the main topics the report recommended to work on. Also, the monitoring and follow-up systems witnessed development over the previous years, because the follow-up and the evaluation is the main tool to improve decision-making. There are other two important issues. One, fighting corruption, and the other, transparency. The experts focused on the measures taken by the country to fight corruption, like the national strategy for fighting corruption, as well as the role played by the National Academy for fighting corruption regarding training, raising awareness. In addition to transparency, including the citizen budget, the citizen plans, as well as the dissemination of information about the state budget. At the end of the report, there were a number of recommendations. These recommendations are there in every part of the report, but in these 3 slides, you will find the recommendations. These recommendations are considered to be a collection of recommendations. First, building upon the legislative structure. The legislative structure has witnessed great development, and it needs more development. We have seen this through a number of laws and amendments that was the basis for socio-economic development. There are still some laws that should be amended, like the general planning law, accessibility to information, the protection of witnesses and informants, the private and the personal rights law, and the report has given priority to all these laws. The other thing that the report talked about is that legislation is very important, but the enforcement of this legislation or law is equally important. The same applies to the strategies. So the idea of having institutional and administrative reforms and financing the enforcement of laws, especially the main laws and legislations, is very important, and this is one of the recommendations in the report. The report in chapter 1 on investing in human capital said that the accessibility to information, to education and health are high, but for quality and competitiveness, these are things that need more effort, and this needs more direct spending on these fields and services. For the information system in Egypt, it's very important. During the previous years, it has witnessed great progress, but it should be sustainable and continuous. And I think that the programs or the initiatives made by Egypt in the health sector or through dealing with pandemic provided a suitable database through which we can deal in making policies. As for the restructuring of the Egyptian economy, the Prime Minister talked about moving to the second phase of the economic reform program, and I think that this issue is an important one, and we can move from the idea of working at the monetary financial level to diversifying the Egyptian economy and focusing on production activities and local industrialization. As for attracting investments and private sector, the report tackled this, as the private sector, be it foreign or local, would lead to accelerating development in Egypt due to the fact that it increases the sources of financing in Egypt, and a number of entry points were tackled, like competitiveness, supporting its mechanisms, the investment cost, as well as the stability of financial policies, and in particular the tax policies. Information technology structure is related to the public services, as well as information security are issues that are related to service provision and reducing corruption and improving the investment environment. There are a number of problems in Egypt that are directly related to awareness and the misconceptions. We have seen this in large parts of the report, like for example issues related to population, overpopulation, women empowerment. There are still a number of issues that need raising awareness, as well as the issue of terrorism. So these were all things that were mentioned in the report. The restructuring of the administrative state bodies is very important through reducing the volume of these bodies and dealing with overlapping between different state institutions. There has been development here, yet the report recommends working more on this. As for decentralization and local administration, this was one of the recommendations included in this report, and connecting it to the idea of domestication of sustainable development goals, because the empowerment of local units and local administration, it would enable them to deal with the gaps and the differences between the different regions and governorates that would achieve effectiveness and efficiency. The last recommendation was on the new administrative capital. The report talked about moving to the new administrative capital as an opportunity to have more updated recent systems, different administrative systems to provide services in a different manner. It's an opportunity to protect the environment as well. So there is a real opportunity through the new administrative capital. Sorry for being lengthy, and I wish that I was able to introduce everything about the report. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Khaled, for this presentation. Maybe it's the longest one for today, but it was compressed to tackle the most important issues. Dr. Hala, let me ask you a question after listening to this presentation on Human Development Report 2021. The report came up with a number of recommendations for the future policies. The Ministry of Planning had a role through providing statistics, information, and data to the experts who developed this report. And I think that the ministry has benefited from such a report. What's your comment? Thank you. In the name of Allah, I would like to thank Dr. Adel Abdel Latif, Dr. Khalid Zakaria for their presentations. I have a comment on what Dr. Adel said, as he is the advisor to the report, and for the first time we see the report in this integrated manner, because we provide the researchers with the data, and it's the first time for us to see it as a whole. And we will hold sessions with the different line ministries to discuss the different parts of this report. My first question to Dr. Adel: you are the advisor to all human development reports at the level of the Arab region. You said that Egypt is the only country that developed such a report during the pandemic, and Egypt was the first country that drew the characteristics of the decade of action. Are we the first worldwide, and between 2020 and 2030, are we the only country worldwide that developed the characteristics of the decade of action? And what should we start working on so that we would always be the first country to do such an achievement? Thank you, Your Excellency the Minister. In this report, Egypt is the first country to put the main characteristics, not in details, of course. In the last part of the report, there is a vision that we won't have only recommendations, but we will find in the report what should be done during the coming 10 years. Due to the pandemic, there are a lot of countries that did not focus on the achievement decade. And I think that this is an important practice, not only to remind the citizens and the decision makers in Egypt, but to remind them that this would be worldwide. The Secretary General of the United Nations last Friday talked about our joint plan for the whole world, and I think that Egypt can contribute to this, because, as I mentioned, it put the main characteristics, and the Human Development Report 2021 puts a baseline what Egypt can do during the coming 10 years. The Prime Minister, for example, talked about overpopulation. So in the future reports, there might be scenarios. If the overpopulation would go on as such, how would this influence development also? The regional element that I talked about, if conflicts surrounding Egypt would go on, how can they negatively influence Egypt? Because most of the countries made great accomplishments with development when they were in a supporting, safe, secure region. And this might accelerate economic development. Let's think that there is a flow of capital, flow of investment, and more trade in the Arab region. how this would increase development in Egypt, so we can develop different scenarios to see how this might have a positive impact on Egypt and also in the African continent. So I advise to go back to regular human development reports, as these are independent reports, so they give the government the opportunity to listen to a different opinion. Because, as I said, this report is developed by independent experts. This is not the opinion of the Egyptian government, nor the opinion of UNDP. So listening to different opinion can help human development in general. I have a question to Dr. Khaled. I know that you are the main author of this report, and this is the first time for me to see the whole report. I have a lot of questions, but to save our time, I have one question. First, a remark. You said that the data stopped at 2011, 2012. You meant 2020, 2021. This is the first remark. My question, the Human Development Report had always a very important annex, an annex on human development in governorates. This is a very important reference for us when we're talking about development within the Decent Life initiative made by the President and talking about the domestication of the Sustainable Development Goals and our belief that real development happens at the level of governorates. You did not talk about this indicator. So I want to say whether this indicator exists or not, because this is essential for this human development report. This is my first question. Should I answer now? As for this point, as you mentioned, this report was covering a very long period, 10 years. So it was so difficult to look at the developments in different governorates at that detailed level. So during this phase and in this report, we focused on the general developments and general performances, but right now we have a plan that during the coming months we will focus on human development measurements at the level of governorates. I think that this would be important because this would help along with the competitiveness indicator that the Ministry of Planning is working on now. Both will give us the baseline for the Decent Life initiative to tell us that after 2 or 3 years what would be achieved through this initiative. So, of course, your remark is very important. I have other 2 questions. You talked about change in the philosophy of social protection. In different countries and in developing countries, they expand with the social protection programs and they spend more on it. Yet, today we're talking about citizen empowerment and motivating them to get out of dependency on social protection to empowerment. The more I empower the citizen, the more options he has through training programs, micro enterprises, the more he gets out of the poverty. This is a debate at the level of citizens and between experts. What did you find in the report? In the indicator of human development in Egypt, we are up to more advanced countries in the indicator of human development. But when I look at the volume of investments pumped by the state over the previous years and I compare those investments to other investments in other countries, I find that the human development indicator and the per capita income in these countries are higher. Why? As you mentioned, it's a matter of debate and controversy at the ideological level. Should we spend more on social services or spend less? We can say that spending on social protection programs exists in all countries, even in the developed countries. The developed countries even spend on poor people in them. But it depends on the issue of economic growth. If the economic growth in a country is up to a level to reduce poverty rates and to increase employment rates, then this mainly can lead to reducing the social protection programs. So, in the framework of the report, the main idea is that we would go on in this direction, but we need to reduce spending on social protection. This happens in different ways. The first way is managing the subsidy systems, because all over the world the average is 20 to 30% of expenditure on social programs depends on management. So if I have a good management, this will lead to more effectiveness. Targeting also is another important point, and it is difficult in Egypt due to the existence of the informal sector. So the idea of targeting here is a main idea. Besides, the type of programs of social protection should be related more to skills, so that the beneficiaries of these programs would be able to get out of these programs through real job opportunities. As for the second part of your question, the influence of spending on human development and per capita income, I think that the first direct answer is population. Because with these investments, there has been an increase in population, so the state cannot achieve qualitative steps and to keep pace with overpopulation. So this is usually the case, and I think that overpopulation is important, and the other thing is targeting sectors that generate more job opportunities. Thank you all. And of course, we will take from your comments. Excuse me, Mr. President, let us now watch an infographic video about governance. In the year 2014, Egypt launched an integrated vision for reform to manage the affairs of the state and the community, to reach an efficient, effective administrative body that is under accountability and contributes to achieving the development goals and increase the satisfaction of the citizen. Human Development Report 2021, development is right to everyone, follows the efforts of Egypt in the field of governance and its influence on development. Egypt seeks to develop and reform the administrative body and the financial management systems to increase its efficiency in providing the fundamental services. And moving to the new administrative capitals comes within this framework to improve the administrative system. Egypt worked on enhancing the mechanisms of accountability, so it focused on monitoring, follow-up and evaluation of local development and local performance to improve the quality of services provided. Egypt took serious steps to enhance transparency and improve communication with the citizens in different fields with multiple tools to enhance the institutions of accountability and fighting corruption. It developed new mechanisms for youth participation in making decision-making and decision-taking, as well well as developing them for management posts. Egypt has moved on financial inclusion, automation, digitization through its different dealings. So it adopted legislative institutional reforms and directed big investments to information and communication sectors. For Egypt to continue its path towards administrative reform, it developed a legislative framework that would keep pace with the developments and support general planning and local administration and fighting corruption. It worked on dismantling the administrative connections to increase efficiency, especially those related to direct service provision to citizens. It accelerated digitization and depending on financial technologies, expanding its scope of work in administrative and services sectors, and increased the preparedness of all state institutions to crisis management. It expanded women participation and the inclusion of the private sector in development. It worked on raising public awareness on the importance of governance to enhance economic and social development. Now, my question is to Dr. Naim Al-Qasir, the representative of WHO in Egypt. In fact, the health sector and the health file is a very big file. And as mentioned in the report, starting through connecting Egyptian health system to governance, improving the public performance, domesticating the medical and health services, there are still challenges facing the health sector in Egypt. Since you are here with us, I need to ask about the face of the world that changed after the pandemic. And there might be different expenditure priorities, on top of which is the health sector, and spending more on the health sector. How do you monitor those efforts and scenarios through which the world has been? In the name of Allah, good morning, Your Excellency, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Abdel Fattah El Sisi, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, I'm honored today, as I am from this region, to be here with you launching the Human Development Report 2021 under the title Development is Right to Everyone, the March and the Path. First, let me focus on your question. We as WHO commend the efforts exerted by the Arab Republic of Egypt and the efforts exerted by the President to give due attention and concern to health through documenting and supporting cooperation with different entities, in particular the development and the health sectors. Dr. Hala Zaid, the Minister of Health and the Development Sector, the Prime Minister. How did we deal with the pandemic as the biggest health challenge faced by the world in the modern history? The pandemic and the challenges it imposed upon us proved the importance of solidarity and cooperation at different levels, not only between the state institutions, and Egypt is an example to that, but also between scientists, civil society, private sector, and in particular the youth. The Arab Republic of Egypt proved that. Also, the pandemic showed that we have a joint responsibility and a responsibility of accountability to be shouldered not only by countries but also by individuals, communities, and the private sector and the civil society to confront any health emergency. Today it is COVID, and we hope that in the future we'll be able to stop other pandemics. Egypt was one of the first countries that cooperated at the regional level, national level and international level. And Egypt was one of the first countries through the visits of the Ministry of Health to a lot of countries to show cooperation and solidarity. we as WHO work on the protection of health security, because this is national security, regional security, and international security. The exceptional efforts exerted by your government to respond effectively to the pandemic helped a lot. Arab Republic of Egypt achieved the strategic balance through benefiting from the resources from the perspective of health, because it was based on evidence and innovation. In this path, all services went on without any exception, including the expansion of providing universal health coverage to all Egyptians and supporting the principle of no one is left behind. Egypt invested in health, and it went on through providing the health services in comparison to other countries at the level of the region and the international level. As the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, said, there are a number of unique initiatives, including the initiative of 100 million lives and other initiatives that can be a role model to a number of countries. Investing in health and not just financing medication, hospitals, clinics, investing in health through the initiatives like the initiative of 100 million health for early detection of diseases and their treatment, and the most important is prevention measures against these diseases, in addition to women and girls empowerment and the Decent Life initiative, and upgrading the services to the most deserving segments like people with special needs, upgrading the services from different dimensions. You asked me about health. I was here with you since 2010, and I'm now here back as the representative of WHO. And in one decade, Egypt made success with monitoring. And this is seen in eradicating hepatitis C in 2010 when I was the assistant director. If I would compare 2010 to this day, I have seen that Egypt was able to eradicate hepatitis C. Egypt in the past, up till the year 2014-2015, was a top country with hepatitis C. Now 23 hepatitis C treatment centers. Now we have enhanced health and eradicated this disease, and under your wise leadership, there is also, in cooperation with everybody, we will announce that we have eradicated other diseases. Your leadership also benefited from digitization at an early phase. What do I mean by early? Before 2018, you launched early detection of not only hepatitis C, but also other chronic diseases from which Egypt is suffering: obesity, hypertension, cancer. Early detection of all these diseases led to optimum use of the resources, reducing cost, early treatment, and better services. Digitization is something you also benefited from, and this is another example of success in Egypt. Digitization and the health information systems helped us during pandemic. So the preparedness that happened before the pandemic 2 years ago was useful during the pandemic. It enabled us to know who are the needy groups, especially those suffering from chronic diseases. Dr. Khalid talked about digitization and said that this enables governance and helps with decision making. It also gives opportunities to youth. As WHO, we hail the efforts exerted by Egypt to provide safe, effective vaccines to COVID-19, in particular under these exceptional circumstances that showed unfair competition between countries to access vaccines. And the pandemic is there with us for a longer period, so we need to limit it through vaccination. Thus, we are working with your government through the Ministry of Health and Population, the Egyptian Pharmaceuticals Authority, as well as the private sector. And here I'm calling on all institutions working on social corporate responsibility to work with us to provide enough vaccines and domesticate the pharmaceutical industries and the safe medical equipments for Egypt and the region, not only to fight the pandemic, but also to fight other diseases and treat them, as well as working on enhancing healthy practices on part of individuals. Families have responsibilities. At the end, Your Excellency the President, I would like to renew our commitment as WHO, along with development partners, to provide all assistance required to enhance the universal health coverage system in Egypt and invest in the health of the human being, the health of the environment, the health of plant and animals, and reach universal health based on right to treatment. Prevention is better than cure, to develop the human being without any discrimination through the inclusion of all those who live on the land of Egypt, including the migrants and the refugees, to achieve peace, fight violence, achieve health, food, economic, environment, security, as well as the sustainable development within Egypt's Vision 2030. God willing, we will be there with you. And my greetings to you all. Thank you. With the same influence of pandemic, I would like to ask Mr. Eric Oshlan, the director of ILO in Egypt. The impact of the pandemic was not just restricted to the health sector, but it influenced world economic growth. It has eaten it up. Let me ask you about some of the figures mentioned in the report. We're talking about a different experience, a positive economic rates in Egypt, in reduction of inflation rates and unemployment rates. Do you have an explanation for that?
Your Excellency, Presudent El Sisi, yes, Egypt has provided good results in terms of resilience, in terms of reactivity to the crisis of COVID-19, comparing to other countries. As several speakers before me mentioned, unemployment rate is low. In terms of job creation, is much better than in other countries. I think the economic policies in Egypt have integrated employment promotion as a central objective. Public investment, taxation, credit, development policies are pressed from an employment perspective. It means that the reforms which have been introduced have also as objective to create jobs. And then the resilience of the Egyptian economy was much better than in other countries. Of course, it's not. There are still some challenges, and for instance, the participation on the labor market has to be improved, in particular for women. I'm looking at Tamaya Morsi and the work we do with her as UN to improve the participation of women on the labor market. We know that women and young people were also the first victims in terms of crisis, because they are easier to fire than people with seniority, and that's why it's important also to have this kind of mechanism. I would like also to mention that I think the capacity of the Egyptian economy to resist is also linked to the efforts done to support the business development. Jobs are created mainly by companies, by private companies, by public companies, and that's important. And that the efforts made by the authorities, but also the efforts from the UN to have a business-friendly environment. That's why we work with agencies like MESMEDA or business association like the Federation of Egyptian Industries to create this environment, to create the opportunity for startups, for the young entrepreneurs to develop their operations, to small or medium-sized companies to expand, to become bigger and bigger, and also to be able to export also to other markets. That's another point also what, as UN, we work with the authorities, and in particular with the Ministry of Manpower, is the issue of also the working conditions. It means that the result of the resilience should also, we need to protect the workers, the workplace. At the same time, we need to improve the productivity and competitiveness of companies. That's why we develop projects on these two aspects. And the last point I would like to mention, it was also mentioned by previous speakers, of course, it's about the informality. Informality is still important in Egypt. It's a challenge for a lot of people to become more formal, and we need to work on different axes to formalize the informal economy. It means first to provide social protection to those who are in the formal economy, who are not part of the beneficiary of social security schemes, but we need to also to encourage the business in the informal economy to become formal. And we can create some incentives, some subsidies for them to become formal, and also in terms of control with the role of the labor inspection to ensure that they respect the legislation. And to conclude, yes, I think the capacity of Egypt not to get positive results, but at least to have less impact than COVID than in other countries, was this commitment to work on these different aspects. I don't know when the COVID crisis will end. I don't know if WHO has a response, but at least, yes, we need to have this kind of support to maintain and to be sure that the system is resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
In fact, during your speeches, two important topics were raised: overpopulation and the importance of social protection programs. One of the pillars of human development is investing in human capital, and this is related to health, education, scientific research, decent housing, social protection programs as well. The state of Egypt worked on these fields because the conviction right now is building the human being and investing in human capital. My question to Ms. Frederica Mir, the representative of UNFPA, United Nations Population Program. After listening to the report, I would like to ask you about two challenges mentioned in the report. One is related to traditions that negatively influence things like overpopulation and women empowerment. The other challenge is how, in light of increase of population, we can reduce the category benefiting from the social protection programs.
Thank you very much for the question. Your Excellency, Mr. President Abdel Fattah El Sisi, let me start with lauding the excellent collaboration between the government of Egypt and the UN agencies, and more recently about the UN cooperation framework, which shows very much how good cooperation is. Challenges are too complex for any one actor to tackle alone, and it's by partnering together that the government, the United Nations agencies, development partners, and private sector can accelerate progress towards the achievement of the SDGs. And each one of us has something different to bring to the table, and we are pleased to see that the government of Egypt fulfills its constitutional commitment on health and education, and together working towards universal access to the basic services. Building human capital will entail supporting effective investment in the fields of, as you said, education, health, food, social protection, and employment. And it was just last week, during the ICF conference, that the World Bank highlighted that currently girls in Egypt will only fulfill 0.49 of their full potential, according to the Human Capital Index. Hence, investing in young people, and more particularly in girls, will strengthen the government's vision to build human capital and capitalize on the demographic dividend. Currently, Egypt has 62% of the population below the age of 29. And the UN stands ready to support the government, and is already doing so, through currently the development of the Girls' Assets Framework, and also through the multi-sectoral youth strategy. Investing in early learning, preparation and secondary schooling, as well as equity-focused digitalization, is crucial to boost learning outcomes and to establish an inclusive education system that prepares all young people to become active and skilled citizens in the future. And we cannot but join the forces of the government of Egypt to address the population growth and improve the quality of life of the Egyptian citizens within the National Action Plan of the Welfare of the Egyptian Family. And the plan, it's a very good plan. It's a multi-sectoral plan, and it puts women at the heart of the national effort and offering them equal access to quality education, economic resources, employment, decision-making at all levels, and last and not least, to decide on their own reproductive health. However, in this whole National Action Plan, what would be very important, and also in the Haya Karima, for which I congratulate the government, it would be very good to put adolescent girls center stage, because adolescent girls are the mothers into 2030. And we need to really make sure that the girls are included in digitalization, economic reforms, etc. So we need to invest in the adolescent girls today, so that they have a wonderful future and they can be part of all the development efforts in our country, in Egypt. And even more so, we need to invest, what we heard from the report, on the poorest families. We saw that many of the poorest families have the highest amount of children. So we need to invest first and foremost on the girls of the poorest families by building their health assets, building their social assets, building their economic assets, making this assets framework central of Haya Karima and the National Action Plan on the Family Welfare will really help Egypt to have a prosperous future. And we all know investment in girls, because it pays off. We have seen the World Bank figures. If we spend one more year in investment in one more year in education of girls, we will have far more increase in the GDPs. Therefore, I hope that the government can consider to really build in the adolescent girls in these two very important programs. And I congratulate the government with this excellent program and with the report today. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Federica. دكتورة نوى بكر، أعتقد حضرتك ليكي تعقيب على الملف ده تحديداً متعلقة بأحوال السكان.
فعلا شكرا لما، وشكرا للدعوة الكريمة وللجهد اللي مبذول في التقرير وللدقة والموضوعية اللي في التقرير. الحقيقة سؤالي للسيدة فريدريكا ماير، وبشكرها على ثنائها على ما قامت به مصر حتى الآن من أجل دعم السكان، ولكن سؤالي يظل التحدي الرئيسي.
But the main challenge is still overpopulation. From the viewpoint of the fund, what is the best investment to reduce overpopulation? It was said traditions. We look at the figures. So how do you see the progress with that?
Thank you for the question. I think Egypt, you know, the International Conference on Population and Development was signed here in Cairo in 1994. And the program really challenges the government to put women-centered state of the program, and also to put a multi-sectoral program in state. And that's very much what is now happening in the National Action Plan. And for the rest, women and men need to have first and foremost the information to plan their family, and it needs to back up also by the services. So it needs to go hand in hand, the information and the services, making it available to the women and the men. And we should not forget to include also men and boys in family planning progress, because it's a decision by the two of them, and we need to make sure that women are empowered and that their empowerment is supported by the men, and that together they can decide on why a smaller family is more helpful to the children. And as Dr. Halle also said, we need to ensure that all the children in the family get their health services, get their education services, and we have to make families understand that it might be more beneficial for the family as a whole and the children to have smaller families. Does that respond to your question?
شكرا. الإجابة تمام يا دكتور. شكرا. الحقيقة إنه الدولة المصرية
The state of Egypt has a unique experience with the file of housing dealing with the unsafe or informal settlements and enabling the largest number of citizens to enjoy decent houses. And this file comes as a priority on the agenda of the state of Egypt, as we have seen, and through the figures as the report mentioned. Let me ask Ms. Rania Hadeya, the director of UN Habitat. What are the biggest challenges that might face any country on its way to put an end to unsafe areas, informal settlements? Thank you for the question, Your Excellency, the President, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. We are glad that Egypt is putting the issue of housing and urbanization on top of its development agenda. Egypt is one of the first countries that ratified international conventions on right to housing and those related right to decent housing, in line with the World Human Rights Declaration. And this issue, because it is very important, this idea of decent houses has been always on different development agendas, like the new habitat and the new urbanization agenda, as well as the sustainable development goals, in particular goal number 11. We talked a lot about overpopulation and this problem, or the challenge it imposes on us. Despite this overpopulation, we have seen the efforts exerted by the state to meet this right and emphasize it by constitution and the different national programs. In cooperation with the United Nations, in the year 2016, the file of housing was published to be the first step to monitor and analyze such a sector and build upon it. In 2020. They launched the housing strategy so that Egypt would be the first Arab country and one of the first countries all over the world that launched a national strategy for housing based on international rights conventions. And this came at a very complicated time when there was the pandemic. But this emphasized more the importance of the right to decent, healthy, safe houses. We cannot talk about the file of housing without talking about the challenge of unsafe or informal settlements, whatever the name you will choose. A number of measures were taken to organize construction and to prevent the spread of these settlements and areas, as well as adopting the idea of integrated participatory urbanization to focus on the city as a general framework for development. And there were a lot of concrete achievements in the field of housing under the umbrella of the social housing law to make sure that there is equal provision of housing through connectivity to different services and utilities, as well as the design and the cost to provide integrated urban communities inclusive to everybody. Let's talk about what extra can we do. There were recommendations in the housing strategy to encourage uniting efforts to support the most needy groups. And the United Nations is emphasizing its readiness to provide the technical support and cooperate with the government to enhance the adaptation of programs, laws, and legislations to the visions, and also make use of the inherent potentials in the city, especially the lands and the vacant housing units, as well as motivating the sustainability of the cities through expansion with the green construction and investing in renewable energy. In addition to the importance of cooperating to enhance means of in-kind and financial aid to the most needy groups, in addition to developing mortgage systems and rental systems to reach out to the different segments of income. The last thing I want to talk about is enhancing Egypt's role as a regional hub in achieving green urban recovery and reconstruction in a more sustainable manner at the level of the African continent and the Arab region. Thank you, Doctor, for this clarification on the future steps. If you would excuse me, Mr. President, distinguished guests, we have another infographic video on environment. Dr. Mohammed Bayoumi, assistant to the resident director of UNDP in Egypt. Doctor, a few years ago, we were not talking about some of these terminologies that we use now on environment. Would you talk to us more about environment sustainability and the expansions regarding the understanding and the application of environmental sustainability from the point of view of United Nations Environment Program? Thank you, Your Excellency President Abdel Fattah El Sisi, distinguished guests. The Human Development Report 2021 included a chapter on environmental sustainability to emphasize Egypt's concern with protecting its environmental assets. Egypt is playing an active role in the negotiations on international environmental agreements and conventions. In 2018, Egypt has hosted COP 2014 on the Convention of Protecting Biodiversity that was held for the first time in Africa. Egypt will host the COP meeting for UN Framework Convention on Climate Change in 2022, and this includes the summit that is held annually for the leaders of the world, and it is expected to be a turning point in our effort to save the planet Earth from the negative ramifications of climate change. To reply to your question, it is known that in development cooperation now all over the world focuses on sustainable development goals, and the natural resources like water, land, energy, biodiversity are considered to be main inputs to any social or economic development. On this basis, United Nations emphasizes that the inclusion of environment and sustainable management of natural resources is a main element to be included in the national strategy for development. In the meantime, clean environment starts by improving the efficiency of using natural resources within the framework of what we call the revolving clean green economy. Things that come out as outputs from an activity can be an input for another activity. Increase of pressure on limited natural resources on the planet lead to the extinct of certain resources, and this won't enable us to achieve the sustainable development goals. For example, We cannot achieve Goal 7 of the Sustainable Development Goals on the provision of electricity to all citizens on the planet by depending on fossil fuel only. But this goal is now related to achieving the targets of expanding the use of renewable energy under the same goal. On the other hand, there is an international agreement that the land cannot endure more carbon dioxide emissions resulting from the consumption of fossil fuel, as this would have a negative impact on the planet. There has been an increase also in the severe climate events, and this is due to the environmental imbalances due to climate change and human activities. So countries all over the world are trying to take unconventional measures to depend more on renewable alternative energy to achieve Goal 7. In this framework, the United Nations cooperated with the government of Egypt to open markets to improve the technology of sustainable energy. And I would like to focus here on small-sized technologies for renewable energy, as this won't only regenerate electricity, but it will create job opportunities and develop the communities that use them. In fact, there has been amazing success stories that contributed to reducing the demand on electricity and fuel, in addition to reducing gas emissions. These are things that happened already in Egypt, and I always emphasize here that before renewable energy and the great development it witnessed in Egypt, Egypt had the great development in improving energy efficiency and achieved results through reducing the loads. Improving the energy policies at the national level kept pace with renewable energy, so this helped transformation to renewable energy and systems of rationalizing energy. The United Nations supported the environment sector in a gradual phasing up of the ozone depleting substances, and this was to adapt with climate change. And the United Nations supported environment sector through increasing dependence on sustainable transportation systems as an alternative to private cars, as well as the technologies of water and wastewater provision and planning of water, in addition to the managing of waste, including medical, electronic, and agricultural wastes. The United Nations is committed to go on working with Egypt in this field, focusing on protecting of the lands in the delta from the increase of the sea level, and to adapt to the impacts of climate change, as well as the spread of sustainable energy, improve energy efficiency and the use of water resources. In the end, we hope that this balanced method to dealing with development would be the key solution to the whole world. Dr. Noha, I know you have a comment, but let us take it at the end of the session because we do not have enough time. I will take a quotation from the concepts of human development. Human development is a tool to improve the lives of the present generations, but it is also protecting the future generations. Mr. Hopkins, the representative of UNICEF in Egypt, generations followed by generations, and repercussions and problems, if not solved now, they would be carried on to the next generations. How do you secure for the coming generations decent, safe life? What are the most important programs that influence the coming generations? Your Excellency, President El Sisi.
You raised. Let me also pay tribute today to the highest representation from government that we can possibly have, which underscores the importance which Egypt places on the fundamental rights associated with human development. And to add to your question, let me start by saying that social protection is not just about reducing poverty now. Social protection is about the future. It is about breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty, where a child inherits his or her parents' deprivations and in turn passes them on to the next generations. It is proven and well accepted that social protection interventions have an enormous impact beyond monetary poverty and contribute to tackling significant inequities in other sectors. Social protection is a fundamental building block for inclusive education and health systems, and more broadly in strengthening cohesion and long-term stability. I take this opportunity to build on my colleagues' interventions to recognize the extraordinary and visionary rollout of Education Reform 2.0, of universal health coverage, and the broader social protection system captured, if you like, by Takaful and Karama, led by their excellencies, the Ministers of Education, Health and Social Solidarity, respectively. We are highly appreciative of the significant investment which the government of Egypt has made and continues to make in social protection. And we recognize the importance of the longer-term strategy and an integrated vision as a key tool to ensure that no one is left behind, so that parents, children, workers, and the elderly can live a dignified life throughout their life, free from poverty. The launch and expansion of the highly effective and efficient Takaful and Karama program over the past years, which is the largest national cash transfer program in the region, the rollouts across the country of the National Health Insurance Scheme, the new social insurance and pension reform, the expansion of school meals and nutrition, the launch of new initiatives such as the extension of social protection to informal workers and economic empowerment programs such as Fursa. These are all clear evidence of the concerted efforts which the government of Egypt is exerting to deliver for tens of millions of people in Egypt in need of such comprehensive support, and it is already delivering. The United Nations is pleased to be playing a supportive role for these government initiatives, and we are committed to continuing our support for inclusive social protection into the future. The UN will continue to support the workforce and institutional capacity in the implementation of these initiatives. We will work with the government to produce analysis, studies, and evidence that inform the government in refining its programs and operations as we collectively strive to produce ever better results with broader reach. Impact for the most vulnerable in Egypt, and through availing international expertise to design, finance, manage, and monitor progress. Let me conclude by saying that while everyone needs and has the right to social protection, the most vulnerable families are those who need it the most. Social protection offers, as we have seen, a platform to reach these parents, children, workers, and the elderly with a variety of tools and with a stronger social workforce through referral to existing services in order to accompany them on a sustainable path out of poverty and vulnerability. And all the evidence shows that programs such as those that Egypt is implementing, such as Takaful and Karama, are the most efficient ways of reducing poverty and providing social protection. I would like to conclude by congratulating the government once again on the great progress made in social protection, where we know that this is the sustainable path out of poverty and vulnerability, to become active and engaged for a more equitable and stronger Egypt and for everybody in this extraordinary country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. القطاع المتعلق أو الفصل المتعلق
The chapter
وضع المرأة
on the status of Egyptian women. This question is to Mr. Christian Arab, the representative of UN Women.
التقرير رصد
The report monitored achievements pertaining to women empowerment in the political field and also some challenges or setbacks regarding her economic empowerment and unemployment rates amongst women in comparison to men.
بشكل أو بآخر كيف
In a way or another, how
وتقدم
do you measure the advance of different communities regarding women's status indicators?
Enviable position of being the last speaker. Your Excellency, President El Sisi, honorable ministers and colleagues, the achievements that Egypt has made by putting gender as a foundation to the overall development of the country are exceptional in both regions that it sits, both in Africa and the Arab states. And it is extremely rare if I can say, globally, to see a head of government place this so squarely in the foundation of all policy, and it's extremely rare and a pleasure to see. Under the National Strategy for the Empowerment of Egyptian Women, the priorities have been clearly set, and there's been clear advancements, parity in gender parity in education, strengthen legislation to respond to all forms of violence against women, strengthen services, enormous investment in terms of women as business owners. And the UN has been a proud partner in all of this. I think breaking so many glass ceilings in elected, appointed positions nationwide, but also within the judiciary recently, it's been crucial. And a crucial achievement is that under His Excellency the President, the ownership of gender equality and women's empowerment, the responsibility of these, while it is led by a very visionary National Council for Women, exemplary, if I may say, it's also seen in a number of line ministries. They take this issue very seriously, which makes our job in the UN completely different. In fact, it's put forward rather than us putting forward. I think where we can see in the data that's coming out of the Human Development Report, where you can still see the bottlenecks, is it is a country with incredibly high education of both young men and young women. And yet, women's labor force participation in Egypt is on par with the region, which is not high. And I think we go right into the root of why we have gender-based violence in the world, why women worldwide are not as employed and not as economically secure. And that comes down to how societies value women and girls, and how societies, what they expect of women and girls, which therefore make it very hard for women and girls to be in public life. And for the UN system, we look forward to scaling up the work that the government has envisioned around supporting early childhood development services, access to these services, subsidizing these services. We look forward to working much more with private sector under the important regulatory environment that the government has set, so that the private sector takes more seriously the importance of family-friendly policies. We look forward to helping the government, and this is something the government tells all of the UN, scaling up, scaling up, scaling up, so that women all over the country have services to help them escape violence in the home. And that underpinning all of this work is the right of women and girls to make their own decisions, and to help the boys and the men to make the bigger decisions. The UN is incredibly impressed with how, despite the impact of COVID, the government of Egypt has kept the gains. They have not let the gains slip on gender equality, and that's clear in the Human Development Report. And it's essential for the resilience of the country that those gains stay and advance. And we're very proud to serve with you on that. Thank you.
We're proud to. Thank you so much, Ms. Christine. الآن سيادة الرئيس الكريم مع
Your Excellency the President, the speech of Dr. Maya Morsi, not defending women as usual, but this time as the rapporteur of the committee that worked on Egypt Human Development Report 2021. Your Excellency President Al Sisi, the President of the Republic, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, for the first time I stand before you not as the chairperson of the National Council for Women, but as the rapporteur of the Committee of Human Development Report 2021. Development, the right to everyone, Egypt, the march and the path. Let me extend thanks and appreciation to you all for all what you do for the Egyptian women, who know that the first defender of her rights is the president, and we are proud before the world that the political will is coming from a conviction and the belief in the Egyptian woman. Your Excellency the President, I was honored to work with my colleague Dr. Hala Said, the Minister of Planning and Economic Development, and the team of UNDP in New York and in their office in Cairo, and the team of experts and researchers who monitor the achievements accomplished and the challenges Egypt is facing, in addition to monitoring and analyzing the public policies adopted by the government of Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, the human development reports monitor the opportunities availed to people and the options made to them, and gives recommendations that are to be discussed by the stakeholders and the decision makers, and it increases the public awareness on human development. It encourages also mobilizing the resources in the main fields of development. The issuance of this report sends a message that we believe in the importance of enhancing the production of data and information to create knowledge through evidence, figures, and facts. And we encourage the provision of reports based on scientific objective methodology that enjoys full neutral standards to achieve the main objective. And would be indicator to the paths of country in seeking to achieve sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt right now is the country of stability, development, building the human being. Around us, we can see the pathways of development, construction, the policies of development from protection to empowerment, and making opportunities for selection as well as non-discrimination, working on issues that it was impossible to be tackled before. At the heart of the state efforts to achieve stability and development, we are focusing on human development with all the resources and tools the country has. The success of this investment is considered to be the cornerstone to building a strong country capable of providing a decent life to everyone in a sustainable manner. This is applying the principle of sustainable development that includes meeting the needs of the present without harming the ability of the coming generations to meet their future needs. Distinguished guests, Egypt today is a real model to applying the Declaration of Right to Development that was issued in the year 1986 to symbolize the principles of equality, non-discrimination, participation, transparency, accountability, as well as international cooperation in an integrated way. Ladies and gentlemen, a community won't be able to achieve peace or social equality or gender equality or environment protection or regulating overpopulation except through the context of sustainable human development that would lead to the security of human beings so that no one would be left behind. Finally, this story is the story of success written by the conscience of people. Great Egypt has drawn a bright future for our young men and young women, a future that gives the opportunity to serious work only, supported by a wise political will that was able to help Egypt free itself from terrorism that won't see light except in the hearts of those who lead it. Your Excellency, the President, by this we came to the end of the speeches of the different representatives. Different issues were covered. We talked about challenges, recommendations, figures to show what's happening on the ground. Do you have any comment on this report? Thank you very much. In the name of Allah. Let me first welcome the UNDP experts team that participated in developing this report in coordination with the Egyptian government. Deep thanks and appreciation to you all because you contributed to this testimony and this report that was suspended for 10 years. So It is a report that is considered to be a testimony of transparency and objectiveness because it's made by experts and international officials who have the experience that would enable them to analyze data and develop it in the form of this report. Let me tell you that in every event I seize the opportunity not to talk to thinkers or researchers or intellects, but talk to the people, the Egyptians, all Egyptians, in a very simple language that they would all understand and receive away from scientific professional words. I will take one important point mentioned by Dr. Adel Abdel-Latif. He asked, did you take into consideration what's happening in the region, the challenges you are surrounded by as one of the things that might influence your path to development? And this encouraged me to talk about this point. I don't know whether in the preamble of the report you talked about all these challenges Egypt and the whole region faced. I would like to tell the Egyptians that the path that all people expected was confronting terrorism and extremism, as well as the difficult war that Egypt has been through over the past 7 years. And this would have been a logical path because we are preoccupied by confronting terrorism. So development in Egypt would have stopped during that years. But we did not do so. And we considered our battle against terrorism in Egypt and the region is based also on development reconstruction through strong performance. A lot of people might say that work in Egypt in all fields is very hasty, violent, deep. It's because we considered our battle against terrorism to be based on reconstruction and development in Egypt. So we did not take only one path in this confrontation, but we took two paths. Confrontation of terrorism and mobilizing our forces in facing it in parallel to reconstruction through a pathway that has a comprehensive philosophy. We are not targeting one sector and leaving the others, but we have targeted all sectors at the same time. We did not leave any sector without targeting its development strongly and comprehensively. This report is not for us, the government or the state. This is for the Egyptians, the Egyptian people, whom I always call the real champion, because we could have developed an economic reform program, but the public opinion might not have accepted it. It's the acceptance of the people that made it successful. When the Egyptians endured, and all people know this decision, and all countries have thinkers, researchers, and specialists who might suggest different tracks. But the success or the failure is related to the implementation of the decision and the acceptance of the people. So when we did the economic reform to face the challenges in Egypt, it was the Egyptians, the Egyptian people to whom I am sending my greetings and thanks. And I'm saying to all the Egyptians, this report is a testimony for you all that you did great. We were only working. We used to say the decision and implement it. But it was the Egyptians who have borne all the sufferings and all the difficulties. Even when we have put protection measures, by the end of the day, the challenges facing the Egyptian country influenced all Egyptians. So I would like to say that this report is a testimony for all Egyptians. So once more, I would like to thank you and congratulate all Egyptians for their ability, thanks to God, through their sacrifices and patience and work, we're able to make this report with all these results and outcomes. And since we said that in the preamble of the report, we need to put the surrounding circumstances in the region and terrorism, we need also to talk about irregular migration. In Egypt, we have 5 million migrants in Egypt. You do not see them in camps. We do not have refugee camps. We have guests here in Egypt who live among us, and we help them with what we can. So take this into consideration. When we have 5 or 6 million in a country that has a population of 100 million, we need to provide them with services and their daily needs. 5 or 6 million might be the population of 2 countries with 2 separate budgets. So this should be taken into consideration also. Why am I saying that? So that when this report is read, not now, but when it is read after years, then in the preamble, people would find a description of the status and how the Egyptians were able to overcome all that, including the challenges made in the preamble. It's so important also to tell you that social protection we're talking about aims to reduce the impacts of economic reform and to reduce the poverty mentioned in the report. You are saying that we can issue a report every 2 years. We wish that on the year the report would be issued the year after next, you would see something different. The plan for a decent life project with 600 or 700 allocated for it. This is the investment budget for ministries for years. So this could have been spent over 10 years to achieve the objective. We insist on achieving this in 3 years and not 10 years. Starting mid this year, over the coming 3 years, we are going to spend these 600 or 700 billion. And here the path is comprehensive. The confrontation here is comprehensive. You talked about environment, education, health, poverty, employment, awareness that are included in the report. Imagine that in Egypt, God willing, over the coming 3 years, we would change the life of 58 million Egyptians. And I will take examples.
عناصر الصرف الصحي في مصر
Wastewater service in villages in Egypt was 12%, and now it became 30 something, 38. So 62%
ناخدهم بقى في 10 سنين.
still remaining. We could have covered them in 10 years, but we insist on covering them in 3 years only. In 3 years,
الصرف الصحي يليق
we will have wastewater services that the Egyptians deserve. This applies also to the number of schools, hospitals needed, as well as the local services and the other activities the state is responsible for in the 4,500 villages. I do not know whether the coming report would be able to monitor the size of great change that will happen. The lakes in Egypt that were there for hundreds of years are all going to be lined to end environmental pollution. So these are all elements together. You are doing wastewater service, lining lakes, building wastewater treatment plants at the national level. So we've spent during this period, 2014 up till now, and over the coming 3 years, we would have spent more than 600, 700 billion Egyptian pounds for treatment plants, tertiary and secondary treatment, to benefit from water and to end environment pollution resulting from this water. I don't know whether we as a government can organize trips and tours to El Manzala, for example, a lake 250,000 fidans can be considered as an inappropriate lake. I would like to take you now to see these 250,000 fidans and how they purified. And I think that no country in the world was able to do so. And this is the only, and there is also Timsah Lake and King Mariut Lake. We are not getting back to their normal status, but we are developing them even. We are doing something unprecedented in the history of Egypt and the region.
فكل الكلام دوت هو عبارة عن زي ما قلت كده هي خطة.
This is all a plan with the philosophy of comprehensive confrontation in all sectors with unprecedented working rates. We did not leave any sector. We worked on them all together. I'm saying this to the Egyptians to be happy with this report and this testimony that is made today, to show whether we have succeeded with this step. That is one step of the 1,000 steps. I hope that we have succeeded. Once more, thank you, and I wish Dr. Hala that we provide this data to everyone, because these are documented, reliable data, and it's experts who had put this data show. I wish that we'd provide this to universities, ministers, and of course media. If you want to know about Egypt, it's not us who would say what happened in Egypt, it's this report that says so. We won't say what did we do in Egypt, but we are saying that this is what Egypt did for itself. Its people, they are all working together hand in hand to overcome these challenges. Once more, I would like to thank you all, and I wish that we, over the coming 2 years, would receive the second testimony or the second report, and I hope that then our score would be much better. Thank you all. Thank you all, and by this we come to the end of this session that introduced the Human Development Report 2021. We tried to cover a large number of sectors. Thank you all. Thank you, Your Excellency, the President.